Hey, I'm Alex. I always believed family was an anchor, something solid you could count on. But one trip home for what should have been a celebration taught me that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who'll cut the rope. What I discovered after they tried to erase me, well, let's just say it changed everything. This is my story of betrayal and how I found my way back to truth, and finally, a quiet kind of justice. You might need to rethink everything, just like I did. I wasn't expecting a brass band or confetti when I pulled up to Grandpa's house, but I damn sure expected someone to answer the door. It was a quiet Sunday in mid-October, the air in Wisconsin already sharp with the promise of winter. Maple leaves, brittle and gold, crunched under my tires like old secrets scattered across the cracked pavement. My rental car gave one last tired hum before I shut it off. In my lap, a small bouquet of fresh carnations sat wrapped in tissue, Grandpa's favorite. I'd even tied them with a soft wool shawl I'd picked up at an artisan fair back in Florida. Grandpa was always complaining his shoulders got cold. I hadn't been home in years, not because I didn't love them or him, but because, honestly, love never seemed to extend an invitation back my way. The screen door groaned open with a familiar ache. No welcoming laughter, no comforting smell of Sunday dinner cooking, just silence. And that distinct old house scent, a mix of dust motes dancing in the faint light and the ghost of lemon oil. "Grandpa?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. I stepped in carefully. The living room was tidy, almost unnervingly so, like a stage set before the actors arrive. A few party hats, still sealed in their plastic, sat on the console table. A single balloon, half deflated and weary, drooped from a piece of Scotch tape stuck to the wall. It was bleak. I found him in the kitchen, facing the window, completely alone. His hands, pale and trembling slightly, rested on the arms of his wheelchair. The birthday cake, chocolate with bright blue frosting, his favorite combination, sat on the counter, untouched, already starting to sag on one side like it had given up. He turned his head slowly as I approached, his lips twitching into a weak, tired smile. "Alex," he murmured, his voice raspy. "I told them to wait. They said they had errands." "Errands?" I leaned in, kissed his papery cheek, and gently draped the shawl over his lap. The wool felt too warm, too vibrant for the chill that had settled deep into this house. "Did they say when they'd be back, Grandpa?" I asked, but my eyes had already found the answer, stuck to the fridge. A note, hastily scotch-taped, probably with the same roll used for that sad, deflated balloon. "Borrowed the funds, 120K from joint account. Will return." My eyes scanned it, then scanned it again. The handwriting was rushed, impersonal, the kind of detached tone you'd use for a stranger, not for family, not for your own father, whose 80th birthday it was supposed to be. I swallowed hard, a bitter burn rising in my throat. "Grandpa," I said softly, kneeling beside his wheelchair. Did my sister say anything else?" He let out a long, shallow sigh. His breath was weak, but his voice, when it came, carried the weight of unspoken disappointments. "I asked them to include you, Alex. Told them you were coming, that it meant something to me. But they said it was complicated. Complicated. There was that word again." He looked away, out the window. "They didn't want to move the date. I remembered all those birthdays, all those holidays I'd missed growing up. Not because I chose to, but because somehow I was never told the real time or the actual location. My flight for this weekend had been booked months ago, just like I'd promised him when we spoke last spring. But of course, no one else remembered. Or maybe, just maybe, they remembered all too well. Maybe that was precisely the point." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling a little unsteady, and walked towards the counter. The cake had started to lean even more, like a weary old soldier about to collapse. I stared at it for a long moment, then my gaze flicked back to that damned note. The joint account. That was our account, the one we'd set up when Grandpa's healthcare needs started getting serious. I handled all the paperwork from Florida, transferred my share religiously every quarter, kept every single receipt. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling slightly as I logged into the bank app. The balance stared back at me. 0. Every penny, gone. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream, didn't curse, though a storm was brewing inside me. I just pressed my hand flat against the cold metal of the fridge, right over that stupid callous note, letting the chill seep into my skin, trying to ground myself. They didn't forget me, I whispered, more to myself than to him. They erased me. Grandpa didn't reply. He didn't have to. The silence in that kitchen screamed louder than any words could. It took less than 20 minutes to understand just how deep this exclusion, this erasure, truly went. No decorations aside from that one pathetic balloon. No extra chairs set up for guests. Not even a single birthday card. I moved around the quiet house, a knot tightening in my chest. I boiled some water, found 2 chipped mugs in the back of the cupboard, and carefully cut 2 slices from the collapsing cake. I wiped down the counter, straightened Grandpa's collar, and then, remembering, I found his favorite old jazz record in the den and put it on the dusty turntable. He smiled then, a genuine smile, even if it only touched his lips for a fleeting minute. As we sat at the small kitchen table, steam rising from our tea, I glanced down at my phone again. No texts, no missed calls, not even from Mom, who usually at least feigned interest. I wasn't just late to a party that never happened. I was unwelcome. This wasn't simple neglect. Oh no, this was strategy. I held my cup close, breathing in the scent of bergamot and the bitter taste of realization. Grandpa reached out and patted my hand, his touch surprisingly firm. "You always knew how to make things feel a little better, Alex," he said, his voice soft. I managed to smile, but I knew it didn't reach my eyes. Something inside me had shifted, cracked open. I wasn't that same kid anymore, the one who used to practically beg for a seat at their table, for a sliver of their attention. I was older now, hopefully wiser, and honestly, I was just tired. They figured I'd stay quiet, like I always had, that I'd just fold under the weight of their calculated silence. But that day, sitting in that cold kitchen, I felt something stir within me, something stronger than sadness, stronger than hurt. It was resolve. "This ends today," I whispered, and I meant every single word. Grandpa's teacup still sat near his elbow, the steam long since vanished into the cool air. He was resting in his recliner now, snug in the shawl I'd brought, his eyelids fluttering as he dozed, occasionally opening to watch the wind whip the autumn leaves outside the window. I'd moved around the kitchen like a phantom, silent but deliberate. The cake was now covered with plastic wrap. The few dishes we'd used were washed and put away, and yet an restless energy pulsed through me. I couldn't sit still. My eyes kept drifting towards the hallway, towards his room, the one they conveniently never showed in their carefully curated photo updates they'd occasionally send. I walked down the narrow corridor, each footstep on the old wooden floorboards pressing deeper into my chest, like a quiet, insistent heartbeat I couldn't ignore. The light in his room was dim, casting long shadows. I flicked the switch, half expecting someone, Callista probably, to materialize and yell at me for snooping. Old habits, you know? They die hard, but the room was empty. Just the faint, familiar scent of old linens, a jar of menthol rub on the nightstand, and a framed photograph of my mother, years younger, smiling a smile I barely recognized. "Top dresser drawer," Grandpa had mumbled earlier, his voice thin and cracking. There's something I meant to give you." I opened it gently. Tucked beneath a jumble of mismatched socks and neatly folded handkerchiefs was a shoebox. It was worn, soft at the corners, the kind of box that's been opened and closed 1,000 times, holding precious things. I sat on the edge of the bed, crossed my legs, and carefully lifted the lid. Photos spilled out first, black and white snapshots, faded Polaroids. Me as a little kid perched on Grandpa's lap, a book open between us. Me proudly holding up my kindergarten coloring portrait of him, all skewed lines and bright colors. A handmade birthday card I'd made him, with lopsided hearts and Grampy spelled with an extra P, and then the locket. I cradled it in my palm, feeling its familiar, comforting weight. Inside, my baby photo on one side, the other side, meant for a sibling, was starkly, painfully empty. I managed to smile, but it was laced with a deep ache in my chest. At the very bottom of the box, tucked under a folded knit glove, was a document. My name jumped out at me immediately, Alex Lee Whitmore. It was a co-ownership draft for the house, dated years ago, long before the fog of dementia started creeping into Grandpa's mind. Grandpa and I were both listed as future co-owners. No Callista, no Brett. But it wasn't notarized. No official stamp, no witness signatures, just 2 names and a silent, hopeful promise. He must have shown it to them, or at least tried to. Maybe that's why Callista had suddenly blocked my number last year. Maybe that's why Brett had sent that condescending text back in April. You're always so dramatic, Alex. Maybe just stay in Florida this year. I gripped the paper, my knuckles white. So, that was their game plan. Keep me out of sight, then push me out of mind, and ultimately maneuver me right out of the will. It felt like I'd been sucker punched, but with velvet gloves, the kind of blow that leaves you breathless and bruised on the inside. You know what? The worst kind of betrayal never screams. It whispers. It seeps in. I stood up, switched off the light, and slid the shoebox back into the drawer, exactly as I'd found it. My mind was racing, 1,000 angry thoughts colliding as I headed back to the kitchen to check on Grandpa. He stirred as I entered, a faint smile touching his lips when he saw me. Did you find it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I did, Grandpa." He nodded, a slow, pained movement, as if it hurt him to admit it. They said you had your own life, that you didn't want to be tied down here." "I never said that," I stated, my voice firm but gentle. "I know." A long, heavy silence hung between us. Then, just as I was about to turn and make him another cup of tea, he muttered, so low I almost didn't catch it. "I tried to fix it, Alex. I tried. They always made me feel like it'd be easier if I just let it be." My hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was pure, unadulterated frustration. That kind of quiet, insidious corrosion. It eats away at a man's spirit, and they'd been counting on it, banking on his decline. Later that afternoon, while Grandpa napped fitfully in his recliner, I took out the kitchen trash. As I lifted the bin liner, a printed flyer, tucked into the side of the can, caught my eye. It was glossy, a trifold with fancy gold trim. "Honoring our hero, private luncheon for Robert Whitmore." The date? Today. Time, 1 o'clock p.m. Location, Twin Cedars Event Hall. I almost dropped the damn bag. The photo on the flyer showed Brett, my brother-in-law, in a sharp navy blazer, raising a toast. My sister, Callista, stood beside him, wearing pearls and that smug, self-satisfied smile she always reserved for press photos and, apparently, funerals of the living. Grandpa wasn't in the picture, of course, because he wasn't even there. My fingers flew across my phone screen, searching Facebook, and there it was, a full album already uploaded. Such a beautiful tribute. "Brett and Callista, you're such angels for doing this for your dad." Comment after comment, a sickening chorus of praise built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated lies. My stomach churned. I didn't even realize I was crying, hot, angry tears, until my thumb slipped across the slick screen. This wasn't about me anymore. Not really. They had used Grandpa, his face, his name, his service, all for their own twisted image management, and he didn't even know. I sank onto the old couch, the locket clutched in one hand, the damning flyer in the other. Outside, a storm was rolling in, the sky turning a bruised purple. Sharp gusts of wind rattled the window panes, and thunder rumbled in the distance, a low, ominous growl. I could feel it echoing something deep inside me, a storm of my own. That's when I opened my laptop. Bank statements, the joint account withdrawals, screenshots of emails between Brett and a financial planner. One I recognized, someone I'd tried to consult about long-term care planning for Grandpa, only to be stonewalled. It was all there, scattered in digital pieces, just waiting for someone to reassemble them into the ugly truth. And that note on the fridge, I took a high-resolution photo of it, making sure the date was visible. They thought I wouldn't come. They thought I wouldn't find out. They were so wrong. I opened a blank document and started a timeline. Not for the courts, not yet. This was for me. Because when you've been systematically erased, the very first step is to write yourself back into existence. By the time the sun finally slipped behind the skeletal trees and the house fell into that deep nighttime hush again, I had documented everything I could find. I backed up all the photos to the cloud, created a folder meticulously titled Truth, and labeled each screenshot, each PDF, with a date and a brief description. There was something about clicking save, again and again, that made it all feel undeniably real, like I was methodically reclaiming the parts of myself, of my family's story, that they had tried to discard like trash. I stood up, stretched my aching back, and headed to the guest room to pull out some fresh sheets. As I tugged open the sticky dresser drawer, a slip of paper fluttered out and landed near my foot. It was a clipping from an old newspaper, the print brittle and yellowed at the edges. I picked it up carefully. Local entrepreneurs, Brett and Callista, their last name, build family care legacy. There was a smiling photo of them, standing outside the very same Twin Cedars event hall, hands clasped like some kind of Hallmark movie couple who never missed a Sunday service or a chance for a photo op. Below the picture, lines of text sang their praises, their years of dedication to caring for aging relatives, their commitment to reviving the family home as a beacon of multi-generational love and care. Multi-generational love and care. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, a wave of numbness washing over me. There was no mention of me, of course. No line about the months I'd spent patiently feeding Grandma her pureed carrots when she could no longer swallow solid food. Not a word about the years I'd stayed in Wisconsin, putting my own life on hold, while they jetted off to networking cruises and beach retreats. Not even a single sentence about Grandpa's dementia diagnosis, the one I had researched tirelessly, tracked meticulously, and developed care plans for from 1,000 miles away after they'd brushed off my initial concerns. They'd rewritten the entire damn story. Alex left us. I remembered a distant cousin commenting on one of Callista's posts once. Said he didn't like the responsibility. No, I just didn't make my contributions photogenic enough for their narrative. I closed my eyes, biting back something hot and acrid rising in my throat. They weren't just stealing assets, tangible things. They were stealing legacy. They were stealing memory. They were stealing credit. They rewrote my story. I whispered to the empty room, folding the fragile newspaper clipping slowly, carefully, and everyone applauded. Later that night, the old house creaked and groaned with its usual symphony of sounds, the soft sigh of floorboards settling, Grandpa snoring gently in his recliner in the living room, the wind tapping impatiently at the windows like it was trying to warn me about something. Then came a knock, soft, almost hesitant. I peeked through the side window, my heart thumping, and blinked in surprise. Gavin, Callista's son, my nephew. He was 17, hoodie pulled up low over his eyes, hands stuffed deep into his pockets like he was afraid they'd betray him by fidgeting. I opened the door just a crack. "Does your mother know you're here?" He shook his head quickly, his eyes wide. "No. I needed to talk to you, Uncle Alex." I let him in. He smelled like cheap cologne and a whole lot of teenage regret. He sat at the kitchen table, his eyes darting around nervously, like he expected his parents to burst in at any moment. They made me unfriend you on social media last year," he blurted out. "Told me you were being difficult, that you were trying to take what wasn't yours." My jaw clenched, but I kept my expression neutral, just listened. "I believed them," he admitted, his voice low, laced with shame. "But today I heard them talking in the car. After that lunch thing for Grandpa. And I saw something." He pulled out his phone, his thumb fumbling as he scrolled through his gallery, and then he showed me a screenshot. It was a group chat. Brett, Callista, and a few other usernames I didn't recognize. "We need to make sure he's not in the way anymore." One message read, clearly talking about me. Then another, from Callista herself. "Let him play the victim. We'll own the estate either way." I stared at the screen, the words burning into my retinas. This wasn't just casual cruelty. This was cold, calculated strategy. Gavin looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "I'm sorry, Uncle Alex," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the tabletop. I didn't know what they were really doing." I nodded slowly. "I did," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I just couldn't prove it. Until now." Before he slipped out the back door, he hesitated. "I think Grandpa deserves to know the truth," he said, "but they'll absolutely flip if they find out I was here, that I told you. You don't have to worry about that," I told him gently. "But thank you, Gavin. Thank you for being braver than your parents." After he left, the house felt even quieter, heavier. I sat back down with my laptop and typed a name into the search bar, a name I hadn't thought of in years, Abram Stein. Grandpa's old lawyer, the one who'd helped him draft his original will, long before Brett started sniffing around the finances. Miraculously, the number still worked. "Mr. Stein?" I asked, when a gruff voice answered. "Who's this?" "It's Alex. Alex Whitmore, Robert Whitmore's grandson." A pause stretched across the line. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in a long, long time," he said slowly. "I thought you'd moved overseas or something. They told me you wanted out of everything family related." I swallowed hard, the familiar bitterness rising. I never said that, Mr. Stein, and I never signed anything to that effect either. Another pause, this one longer, more thoughtful. Interesting, he finally said, his tone sharpening, because your name disappeared from the draft trust about 4 years ago. They said you'd signed a release. My pulse pounded in my ears. I never saw any release. I certainly never signed one. I thought so, he murmured almost to himself, because you were on the original draft. I still have a copy here somewhere. Want me to email it to you? Yes, please, I said, my voice tight with a mixture of vindication and fresh anger. After we hung up, I opened a blank email and titled it, For Legal Reference Whitmore Estate. I attached the screenshots, the dates, Gavin's damning messages, even a PDF of the bank withdrawal trail showing the $120,000 disappearing. Somewhere between the burning rage and a cold, steely resolve, I felt a flicker of clarity. Not because I was desperate for revenge, not really, but because I needed the truth to breathe again, to have its own space in the world. Grandpa stirred in his recliner around 2 in the morning. I helped him shuffle to the bathroom and back. He moves slower these days, each step a careful test of balance and his dwindling patience. Back in the living room, he sat and looked at me with those pale, watery eyes that still held occasional flashes of the sharp man he used to be. They'll be back soon, he said softly, his voice laced with a weary resignation. They'll act like nothing happened. I crouched beside his chair, gently taking his frail hand in mine. Next time they walk through that door, Grandpa, I said, my voice low but steady, I won't be the quiet one anymore. Grandpa had barely finished his morning oatmeal when the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent, and sickeningly cheery, like someone announcing good news they hadn't earned. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, bracing myself. Through the lace curtains of the front window, I saw them. Brett, my brother-in-law, in a freshly pressed polo shirt. My sister, Callista, in a bright coral blouse that perfectly matched her lipstick. They even had matching smiles. Wide, eager, and utterly, chillingly hollow. They burst through the front door, like actors making a grand entrance onto a stage, their voices a little too loud, a little too bright. Happy belated birthday, Dad, Brett boomed, his voice a pitch too high, like a bad salesman pushing a faulty product he knew didn't work. Callista followed close behind, her arms laden with a cluster of pastel balloons and a bakery box tied with a festive ribbon. We brought cupcakes from that little shop you like, remember? I didn't move from my spot in the archway leading from the kitchen. Callista's eyes met mine, and her smile tightened, just a fraction, at the edges. As she leaned in, ostensibly for a hug, she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear over the forced cheer. Still playing nursemaid, huh, Alex? Her perfume, some cloyingly sweet floral, smelled like overripe roses and something synthetic, almost chemical. I didn't hug her back. I just stood there. Grandpa blinked at them from his recliner, his expression polite but distant. Where were you yesterday? He asked, his voice quiet but clear. Oh, Dad, Callista giggled, a brittle sound, as she brushed off his question with a wave of her hand. We just had to handle a few important things. We figured we'd make it all up to you today with sweets and gifts. She set a brightly colored gift bag on the coffee table with a flourish, as if it contained something truly precious. I stayed silent, watching them flutter around him, their affection so exaggerated it was almost grotesque. Brett handed him a card, ruffled his thinning hair with a patronizing pat, and then, of course, took out his phone to snap a selfie with Grandpa, who didn't even attempt to smile for the camera. They stayed for just under an hour, long enough to leave behind the carefully constructed illusion of love, but not nearly long enough to actually show any genuine warmth. When they finally left, their car engine fading down the driveway, I waited a beat before I picked up the gift bag. Nestled beneath a cloud of pastel tissue paper was a plain manila envelope labeled simply, Financial Finalization. No card, no personal note, just those two stark words. Something cold and heavy curdled in my chest. I opened it carefully. Legal paperwork, a reverse mortgage form, one that would, in no uncertain terms, place Grandpa's home, this house, firmly under Brett and Callista's control. Grandpa's signature was already scrawled at the bottom, sloppy, uneven, clearly not his usual hand. Notarized. My name, of course, was nowhere on the document. I held it up to the window, the ink shimmering faintly in the morning light. They hadn't just brought cupcakes. Oh no. They'd brought a ticking time bomb, wrapped up in a pretty ribbon. They brought cupcakes in one hand, I murmured to the empty room, and a dagger in the other. I checked the date of notarization. It was 2 weeks ago. Did they have him sign this when I was still in Florida? I whispered aloud, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Grandpa had said he didn't remember signing anything important lately. Now I knew why. Brett returned alone about 15 minutes later, claiming he'd forgotten his sunglasses. He found me at the dining room table, the damning document spread out before me. He paused for a fraction of a second, then that practiced oily smile slid back into place. So, still shacking up in the guest room, Alex? I didn't move, didn't even look up at him initially. You forged his signature, didn't you? He raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Excuse me? This paper, I said, tapping the edge of the document with a forefinger. This house. You really think I'm gonna let you just waltz in here, flash a few stale cupcakes, and gut what's left of him with a goddamn pen? He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound, and stepped closer, his eyes turning cold and hard. You're being dramatic, Alex, as usual. Am I? He leaned in then, his voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. Who's gonna believe you, Alex? You're the estranged one, remember? The screw-up. I'm the responsible son-in-law. Callista's the devoted caregiver daughter. You send shawls and postcards from your little fantasy life in Florida. I folded the paper slowly, deliberately, and slid it back into the envelope. Maybe no one believes me yet, Brett. He didn't reply, just straightened his polo shirt, gave a smug little tug at the collar, and walked out, whistling softly under his breath, like this was all just business as usual, another deal closed. That night, as a small fire crackled in the hearth and Grandpa dozed nearby in his recliner, I sat beside him, just watching the flames. He stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open. I remember, he said faintly, his voice thick with a tired, poignant nostalgia, when they used to ask me for bedtime stories. He paused, a sigh escaping his lips. Now they write fiction in courtrooms. I swallowed the lump that had formed in my throat. He hadn't seen the reverse mortgage document, not yet, but something in him, some deep, intuitive part, already knew. Maybe not every sordid detail, but enough. I gently tucked the blanket more snugly around him, brushing a few stray crumbs from his shirt. He gave me a soft, almost imperceptible smile and fell back asleep, murmuring my name, just once, like it was the only part of his story, his life, that still felt true and untarnished. Later that night, I added the scanned image of the fraudulent document to my truth folder, tagged it mortgage fraud forgery, and emailed a copy to Mr. Stein with a brief, factual update. Then I turned off all the lights, sat in the darkness of the living room, and waited. Because the next name on that fraudulent paperwork, besides Grandpa's forged signature, was a notary. And according to the signature date on the document, she was scheduled to return the very next morning for a final review and confirmation. And suddenly everything, the cupcakes, the gift bag, Brett's ridiculously fake search for his sunglasses, it all clicked into place with chilling precision. They weren't just improvising their cruelty, they were performing, following a script. By dawn, I'd barely managed 2 hours of restless sleep. The reverse mortgage document, now sealed in a clear plastic sleeve, sat on the kitchen counter beside my coffee mug, a silent testament to their greed. The sun hadn't fully risen, painting the eastern sky in pale, watery hues, but my resolve had. It was solid, unshakable. I was just rinsing out Grandpa's oatmeal bowl when the doorbell rang again, a different tone this time. Not falsely cheerful, but more businesslike, a rhythmic, efficient chime. I opened the door to find a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a nondescript navy suit, holding a leather portfolio. "Good morning," she said, her smile professional but impersonal. "I'm Susan Eldridge, Notary Public. A Mr. Carson scheduled me for final signatures this morning regarding Mr. Whitmore." Mr. Carson? That was the name on the reverse mortgage paperwork some local loan officer Brett had undoubtedly buttered up. I stepped aside slowly, keeping my voice level, calm. "Of course. Please, come in." She followed me into the dining room. Grandpa was still in his chair near the fireplace, dozing gently with a blanket over his knees. As the woman set her bag down on the table and began laying out a series of papers, he stirred. His eyes squinted towards her, a flicker of confusion in their depths. "Do I?" Do I know you? Susan smiled politely, though it faltered slightly. You. We met last month, sir. You signed some preliminary documents then. I just need your final approval today. I turned toward the counter, composing myself while I pulled out 2 mugs. Coffee? Or maybe some tea, Miss Eldridge? She hesitated for a moment. Tea? Oh, sure. That would be lovely. Thank you. While the kettle boiled, I moved toward the hallway where I'd left my phone charging overnight. I quickly texted Dana, my lawyer friend. Need eyes on a situation. Can you FaceTime in 10? Notary here. Big move coming. 3 dots pulsed immediately on my screen. Then her reply, yes, I'm ready. Don't let him sign anything and record if you feel it's needed. I came back into the dining room carrying 2 steaming mugs, and as I set hers down, I casually asked, Miss Eldridge, could I just see your ID for our records? She blinked, clearly a little surprised. Oh, of course. She handed it over, visibly thrown off by my calm, direct scrutiny. I pretended to scan it carefully while, under the cover of the table, I clicked the voice recorder app on my phone and quickly opened FaceTime, propping the phone so the camera had a clear view of the table. Its screen quietly illuminated Dana's waiting face in a soft rectangle, almost hidden beside the stack of paperwork. Then I sat down opposite the notary. Before we begin, Miss Eldridge, I said, my voice steady and even, can you tell me exactly who requested this visit? Who initiated this final signing today? Susan looked at me, her brow furrowed in puzzlement. I was told by Brett Carson. He said everything was cleared with the family, that Mr. Whitmore, she glanced towards Grandpa, who was now watching us with a vague, sleepy interest, had reviewed all the documents and was in full agreement. He hasn't, I replied, my voice firm, unwavering. And just so you are aware, you're now on a video call with Dana Atwell. She's an elder law attorney licensed in California, and she'd like to listen in on this proceeding. Susan blinked rapidly, her professional composure visibly cracking. Is this legal? Dana's voice came through my phone speaker, calm, clear, and authoritative. It is perfectly well within our rights, Miss Eldridge, to document a process that may involve potential elder financial abuse. I'm just an observer for now. Susan's hands, which had been hovering over the documents, froze on the table. I wasn't aware. Just then, the front door opened sharply, without a knock. Brett walked in, his sunglasses now hanging jauntily off the collar of his polo shirt like some small-town tech bro who thought he owned the world. Ah, great, Susan. You're here. Everything set? He glanced around the room, clearly not expecting an audience, his eyes briefly grazing past me till the folder shed started opening. We're all set here, he added, his gaze flicking to Grandpa. No, Brett, I said, my voice ringing out in the sudden silence. We're not. He straightened up, his smile tightening into a grimace. Come on, Alex, let's not make this into a... You scheduled this meeting behind Dad's back. I cut him off. He doesn't even remember you doing it. Do you, Grandpa? Grandpa blinked slowly, looking from Brett to me. Did I? I don't. Exactly, I said, my voice rising slightly, fueled by a surge of protective anger. And you've used that confusion, that vulnerability, to manipulate him. Susan, I turned back to the now pale-faced notary. You should know he was pressured into signing the initial documents. You also need to know that signature on the main agreement? It's a forgery. Susan looked back and forth between us, clearly deeply uneasy. Dana was still on the screen, silent, but her presence a palpable weight in the room. You forged his signature once already, Brett, I continued, my eyes locked on him. Trying to legitimize it now with a final rushed signing doesn't clean the rot underneath. You're being dramatic, Alex, Brett said, attempting a dismissive chuckle, but his usual oily charm was curdling fast. In being accurate, I retorted. Dana finally spoke again, her tone clipped and professional. Brett, you should be aware that any document signed by an individual who may lack clear mental capacity, especially when under duress or family pressure, is highly challengeable in court. Susan stood up abruptly, gathering her papers with trembling hands. I can't proceed with this. This isn't standard procedure. I'm leaving. As she practically fled the room, Brett gave me one long, venomous look. You always were the emotional one, Alex. And you, I shot back, my voice ringing with conviction, always hid behind forms and titles and fake smiles. But here's the thing, Brett. Paper burns, and I have backups. He stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind him. A few minutes later, the door slammed again, this time from the side entrance. Callista burst in like a thundercloud on heels. "Are you trying to ruin everything?" she hissed, her face contorted with fury. I didn't move from my seat. If everything means lying, stealing, and manipulating a vulnerable old man who trusted you implicitly, then yes, Callista, that's exactly what I'm doing. Her mouth opened, then closed again, speechless for once. She spun on her heel and stormed out just as her husband had. Grandpa, who had been sitting quietly through the entire exchange, looked at me with a faint glimmer of understanding in his eyes, then nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Good boy," he murmured, so softly I almost didn't hear it. I sat down beside him again, taking his hand. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I felt the fire that had been simmering in my belly move up into my spine, making it straight and strong, steady, purposeful. But what I didn't know yet was that this was just the rehearsal. The real performance, the main event, was scheduled for Sunday at the family meeting they had summoned me to. I arrived 5 minutes early. Not because I was eager to walk into the lion's den, but because I wanted them to know I wasn't hiding, wasn't afraid. The sunroom in Brett and Callista's meticulously decorated house looked like it had been staged for a lifestyle magazine spread. Artfully arranged throw pillows perfectly matched the fresh flowers on the console table. A crystal pitcher of lemon water gleamed invitingly, and that same smug little ceramic sign sat on a bookshelf. Family is everything. Oh, the irony. They were all already seated, a silent tribunal, except for one conspicuously empty chair in the corner, clearly designated as mine. Callista stood as I entered, her smile, overly bright, stretched taut across her face. "Alex," she chirped, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're so glad you could make time for us." I gave her a tight, humorless smile in return and walked further into the room, my canvas folder tucked securely under my arm. Brett gestured towards the isolated chair with a magnanimous air, as if he were seating a defendant at his own trial. "Before we begin," he said smoothly, his voice like oil on troubled waters, "we just want to clear the air. No drama, no tension, just family." I sat. Callista clasped her hands together in front of her, like a sanctimonious talk show host about to deliver a profound platitude. "We're all concerned, Alex. You've been, well, spiraling a bit, and we thought a gentle intervention might help." She nodded towards Brett, who then slid a thick stack of papers across the polished table towards me. A caretaker agreement. 5 neatly typed pages. Clause 1. I, Alex Whitmore, waive any and all right to ownership or inheritance of Robert Whitmore's property. Clause 2. I assume full personal responsibility for any and all debt incurred during my voluntary stay caring for Robert Whitmore. Clause 3. I agree not to contest any future trust or estate decisions made by Callista and Brassname. I looked up from the insulting document, my eyes meeting Brett's. Is this some kind of sick joke? Brett shrugged, a picture of feigned innocence. We just want to protect Dad's legacy, Alex. And avoid any future complications. And I'm the complication. Is that it? Frankly, Alex, Callista chimed in, folding her arms across her chest with an air of finality. Yes. She walked over to the large wall-mounted television and with a decisive click of the remote brought up a slideshow. Let's look at the timeline, shall we? She said, her voice taking on a narrative, almost performative tone. Photos began flashing on the screen. Me in Portland at a work conference, me smiling on a beach I hadn't actually visited in over 5 years, a photo clearly lifted from an old social media post. This is where Alex wasn't available for Grandpa, she narrated, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. He chose his career, his own life, over his family. And that's fine. Just own it, Alex. I sat perfectly still, letting her little show play out. Then came the emails, screenshots, some conveniently cropped, others presented entirely without their original context. She declined Christmas. Wait, she still had me as she? Or was this a slip from an old script? I'd correct her later if needed, but for now the substance was the insult. The email actually said, he declined Christmas. He wasn't comfortable coming home. His words, Callista added triumphantly. I calmly opened my own folder and quietly began matching her cherry-picked photos and email snippets with the full, unedited email chains, the whole conversations. I wasn't comfortable coming home, I said, my voice even but firm, because Grandpa was being left alone for days on end with no support. I wasn't comfortable because the last time I visited, You accused me of fabricating his health issues and overreacting. Callista didn't even blink. You always were dramatic, Alex. I turned my gaze to Grandpa, who was seated beside the fireplace, his head drooped slightly to one side, as if the weight of their deception was too much for him to bear. His eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused, then closed again. I noticed the bottle of Ativan on the side table next to him, the dosage label looking suspiciously high, twice what his doctor had prescribed. You sedated him for this? This ambush? I asked, my voice laced with incredulous anger. He was agitated. Brett cut in smoothly. We didn't want him to be overwhelmed. Right, I shot back. Overwhelmed by the truth, you mean? My hands were shaking now, but I fought back the tears that threatened. You've orchestrated this entire pathetic theater so you could play the noble, concerned airs while systematically pushing away the one person who actually fed him, dressed him, and listened to him when he was scared and confused. Brett leaned back in his chair, the picture of condescending patience. This isn't helping anyone, Alex. No, I agreed, my voice quiet but resonant. It never did, especially not him. Then the projector screen behind Callista stuttered and went dark. A cord had apparently loosened, and behind it, visible through the sheer curtain of the sunroom window, I saw something that hit me harder with a more visceral punch than anything they'd said or presented. The birthday cake. The very same chocolate cake with blue frosting that I had found melting and abandoned on Grandpa's kitchen counter just days before. Still untouched, now crusted and dry, sitting forlornly on a plastic folding table in the corner. Forgotten. Just like him. Just like they'd tried to make me. My stomach turned violently. Callista followed my gaze, then scoffed dismissively. Oh, that. We were just going to throw it out. You couldn't even do that much, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. A heavy pause descended on the room. Not a comfortable silence, but the dense, oppressive hum of deep discomfort, of all the unspoken, ugly things hanging in the air between every carefully chosen word. I stood up slowly, and, without asking permission, without raising my voice, I walked over to that forgotten table and picked up the cake. It was lighter than I expected, dry and hollow. Do you even remember what day this was for? I asked, turning to face them, the pathetic cake held out in my hands like an offering or an accusation. Brett blinked, feigning confusion. What are you talking about? This cake, I said, my voice gaining strength, was for Grandpa's 80th birthday. You told him you were taking him out for a celebration, then you abandoned him, left him alone in his wheelchair. You posted pictures from a different party, a PR stunt, smiling for strangers while your own father sat in a silent room, utterly forgotten. And now you have the audacity to ask me to sign away the only stability, the only security he has left in this world. Silence. Thick, unbreathable silence. I returned to my seat slowly, deliberately placing the cake on the table in front of me. This will not be his legacy, I said, my voice low but unwavering, and it sure as hell won't be mine. No one moved. They were waiting, I could feel it, waiting for me to explode, to scream, to break down, to storm out defeated. But I didn't. Instead, I opened my folder again and methodically laid out copies of bank statements, medical records, notarized logs of care, and Grandpa's original, untampered with will. This, I said, my voice clear and strong, this is what's real. Not your carefully curated slideshows, not your self-serving, fabricated lies. And when I looked at Callista's face, tight, cornered, a flicker of genuine fear finally showing in her eyes, I realized something profound. They weren't truly afraid of me. They were terrified that I'd finally stop staying quiet. The air in that sunroom didn't move. Even the autumn breeze outside seemed to hold its breath. I could feel every eye in the room fixed on me, waiting, expecting me to crack, to retaliate with anger, to yell and make a scene. But I didn't. I just looked at each one of them in turn, their frozen, insincere smiles, their polished shoes, the layers of fake compassion wrapped around their deceitful performance, and I nodded. Not because I agreed with a single thing they'd said or done, but because I was done playing defense. I was done reacting to their script. I bent down slowly, reached into my tote bag, and pulled out the folder I'd kept sealed for months, waiting not for a moment of revenge, but for a moment of absolute clarity. If no one in this room has ears for the truth, I said calmly, my voice surprisingly steady, then maybe you'll listen to his voice. I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memos app, and hit play. The room filled with the low, slightly gravelly sound of Grandpa's voice, recorded one quiet afternoon a few months back, while I was sitting with him, clipping his nails by the window as he looked out at the birds. I know they think him too old, too out of it to notice. His voice wavered, then firmed, but I see what they're doing. Alex is the only one who stayed human through all this. He didn't want anything from me, nothing material, just time. No one said a word, not even Callista, whose face had gone ashen. I let the silence, heavy with Grandpa's truth, do its work. Then, I slid a second document across the polished table towards Brett. I didn't come here today to argue, I said, my voice even. I came to clarify. It was a notarized power of attorney, signed and witnessed 6 months ago by Grandpa himself, in the presence of a licensed hospice nurse and an independent third-party notary. All legal, all completely binding. I tapped the paper with my forefinger. This document, I stated, gives me full medical and financial authority. It supersedes the fraudulent one Brett was waving around last week, the one with the mismatched forged signature and no legitimate witness stamp. Callista snatched the paper from the table, her eyes darting frantically across the page. This is a lie. You manipulated him into signing this. No, I interrupted, my voice cutting through her hysteria. You silenced him. There's a very big difference. Her lips parted as if to protest further, but Brett cut in, his voice shaking slightly, a tremor of fear finally breaking through his arrogant facade. This isn't real. You can't just spring this on us like this. I didn't spring it on you, Brett, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. You just chose to ignore it, to believe your own lies. I opened my folder again. Click. Another document. This time, a detailed financial trail. I asked a forensic accountant to take a look at Grandpa's accounts a while back, I explained. Funny how his miscellaneous withdrawals, the ones you two managed, lined up perfectly with payments made to your consulting company, Brett. You billed him for consultation fees, for family legacy strategy packages. You even had the gall to charge his account for a high-end patio heater that you installed on your own deck. That's a legitimate business expense. Brett snapped, his face flushing a dark red. We use that heater for client events, for community nights. No, Brett, I said, locking eyes with him, my voice cold and precise. You used it to host your backyard wine tasting nights with your Rotary Club buddies while Grandpa, your wife's father, sat in a drafty living room without adequate heat for 3 consecutive winters because you claimed a new furnace was too expensive. Brett's jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. He couldn't. Then I reached into my bag one last time. This, I said, laying it gently but firmly on the table, is the final amended version of Grandpa's trust. Amended and legally filed 3 weeks before his major stroke. Callista's face twisted into a mask of disbelief and fury. That's not possible. Oh, it is, I assured her, and it was kept securely in a safety deposit box, in his name. Box number 312, First Trust Bank, verified by an independent third party just this week. I flipped the document open to the final page and pointed to the critical clause. All real estate assets, including the primary residence and the lake house, and all residual financial holdings are to be transferred to Alex E. Whitmore, sole heir and designated caretaker, in the event of my incapacitation or death. The signatures were clear, impeccable. The official stamp from the trust attorney in Milwaukee was visible and verifiable. The amendment was valid, airtight. For a long, breathless second, no one moved. Then Brett pushed back violently from the table, his chair scraping loudly as he knocked over his water glass, sending ice and water cascading across the polished wood. You set us up, he barked, his voice hoarse with rage. This whole thing, this meeting, you staged it all. I looked at him, my expression calm, my voice level. No, Brett, I said quietly. You set the fire. I just walked through it and refused to burn. Callista covered her mouth, her eyes redrimmed and wide with shock. She stood abruptly, turned, and fled the room. I heard the distant slam of the bathroom door. Across from me, Brett slumped in his chair, deflated, like all the air, all the fight had been knocked out of him. I stood up, adjusted my shirt, and began to calmly gather my papers. I'm not here to destroy anyone, I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. But I will not let you bury the truth any longer. Not anymore. Grandpa stirred slightly in his chair by the fireplace. His eyes were half open, his gaze meeting mine, and it lingered there, just for a moment, just long enough to let me know that he'd heard some of it. Maybe, somehow, all of it. As I placed the documents carefully back into my bag, I could feel the atmosphere in the room change. Not with shouts or chaos, but with a deeper kind of tremor. The kind that comes when the masks finally crack and you see with stark clarity who people really are beneath the veneer. I didn't feel victorious, not in a triumphant, gloating way. I felt free. But I also knew, looking at the simmering resentment in Brett's eyes, that he wasn't done yet, and neither, it seemed, was I. Brett didn't leave with the others. While Callista remained hidden and the few other complicit family members fumbled for their jackets or retreated into an uncomfortable silence, he stayed seated, jaw clenched, his eyes sharp and calculating, like a gambler who still thought the game wasn't over, that he had one more card to play. He reached into his expensive leather briefcase and yanked out a thick manila folder, already dogiered at the corners, as if it had been handled and rehandled more than once. "This isn't over, Alex," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. I didn't flinch. "You're right, Brett," I replied calmly. "It's not." He slammed the folder down on the table between us. "My lawyer says Grandpa wasn't of sound mind when he supposedly signed that amendment. That trust you're so proud of? It's invalid. We'll have it voided in court by next week." I could see it now, clear as day, his Hail Mary pass. The desperate shift from smug, superior manipulation to outright aggressive deflection. But I was already several steps ahead of him. "I know what you're trying, Brett," I said, my voice even. "That's why I took the liberty of inviting a witness to this family discussion." At the far end of the sunroom, near the patio doors that overlooked their perfectly manicured garden, a woman stood up slowly, almost unnoticed until that moment. She wore a neat, professional black pantsuit, carried a clipboard, and had a small silver badge clipped discreetly near the neckline of her blouse. County Probate Clerk. A few of the remaining family members audibly gasped. Callista, who had apparently crept back into the room, her face tear-streaked and pale, turned an even whiter shade of ghost. "This meeting," Brett, I explained, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room, was never just a casual family conversation. It's a pre-hearing affidavit session, fully documented. Everything you've said today, every threat, every admission is admissible." The clerk gave a polite, almost imperceptible nod in my direction. "You can't be serious," Brett muttered, his bravado finally crumbling. You ambushed us." I shrugged, a small, almost indifferent gesture. "No, Brett, I simply gave you a stage. You just didn't bother to ask who was in the audience." Callista leaned towards me then, her voice shaky with a mixture of fury and fear. "You think this is justice, Alex? Humiliating everyone like this?" I kept my tone steady, my gaze unwavering. "This isn't about embarrassment, Callista. This is about accountability, about truth." Then I turned to the clerk. "Ma'am, if I may, I'd like to present the video deposition." She nodded again. I walked over to the table where Brett's fancy audiovisual equipment was set up and connected my laptop to the small projector he'd used for his pathetic slideshow. His own equipment, ironically. I hit play. The video filled the wall behind me. It was Grandpa, sitting upright in his familiar recliner in his own living room, wearing the old soft flannel shirt I'd bought him years ago. His eyes were clear, his expression surprisingly calm and composed. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, sat beside him, holding a clipboard. "Today is April 11th, Sarah said, her voice gentle but professional. "Mr. Whitmore, can you tell us, in your own words, why you've asked for this recording to be made?" Grandpa smiled faintly, a genuine, if tired, smile. "I want my family, especially Alex, to hear this directly from me, not secondhand, not twisted and distorted through someone else's mouth." He looked directly into the camera lens, his gaze piercing, almost defiant. "I've seen what greed does to people. I've watched them say all the right, pious things, but do all the wrong, cruel ones. I want my home, my memories, my legacy, to go to the one person who never once treated me like an asset to be exploited or a burden to be managed." He paused, taking a slow breath. "Alex is my executor. I trust him completely. I want him to have everything when I'm gone." The video cut off, clean and final. There was no speaking in the room for a long, heavy moment. Then, as if the ground itself had shifted beneath his expensive Italian loafers, Brett pushed himself to his feet, his face contorted with rage. that could have been coached. He didn't even mention the specific trust document. Actually, Brett, I said, my voice calm and cutting, he did. Just not in that particular clip. I placed another, much thicker envelope on the table. This one wasn't thin or speculative. It was heavy, official, bearing the distinct weight of state seals, multiple signatures, and certified notary stamps. This, I announced, is the full legal video deposition and amendment package, witnessed by 2 independent medical professionals and a neutral legal observer, logged and submitted directly to the county probate court 3 full weeks before his stroke. Your legal team had access to none of it because it wasn't filed through your usual network of contacts. It was filed by his personal hospice attorney, someone entirely separate from the estate attorney you two tried so hard to coerce and manipulate. Then, I played my last card. I walked over to the ornate buffet table, where an innocent-looking manila envelope sat, almost hidden between the lemonade pitcher and a bowl of untouched, pretentious olives. I wasn't planning on sharing this today, I said, picking it up. But you, Brett, you forced my hand. Inside was a copy of the deed to the old lake house, stamped, filed, and officially recorded through the county assessor's office. It's mine now, Brett, I said softly, letting the words hang in the air. His head shot up, his eyes wide with disbelief. What? How? You transferred it into one of your sketchy LLCs for maintenance, management, and tax purposes, remember? Then you conveniently let the property taxes lapse for 2 years, probably assuming no one would notice, or that you could scoop it up cheap when it went to auction. But I did notice. I paid off the outstanding tax lien, acquired the rights through the subsequent public auction, and legally reclaimed the deed. It's all above board. You bought the lake house? Callista whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded. You were preparing to sell off his memories, his favorite place on earth, like it was nothing more than old furniture. I bought them back. Brett's fist slammed down hard on the table. You calculated all of this. You used him. You used his decline to come after us. No, Brett, I said, my voice firm, unwavering. You ignored him. You underestimated him, and you certainly underestimated me. My voice dropped, filled with a quiet intensity. And I didn't come after anyone. I just finally refused to keep being the quiet one who cleaned up after your messes and enabled your deceptions. The room started to shift then, the carefully constructed facade of their lives visibly unraveling. Finally, a few of the more distant cousins mumbled excuses and quickly made their exits. Uncle Drew, who had always been a passive bystander, stood in stunned, open-mouthed silence. Even Aunt Margie, Callista's closest confidant, was surreptitiously wiping a tear from her cheek. Callista lowered her gaze, her lips trembling, defeated. But Brett wasn't quite done. He lunged towards the table, knocking over a glass of iced tea, sending papers scattering across the floor. This time, however, 2 uniformed staff members from the courthouse, who had been waiting quietly and unobtrusively near the front entrance, stepped forward swiftly and decisively. One of them placed a firm, restraining hand on Brett's shoulder. Sir, he said, his voice calm but authoritative, you need to calm down. Now, Brett's face crumpled in disbelief, his features contorting as if the world itself owed him more chances, more sympathy, more deference. But no one in that room moved to defend him. Not this time. I calmly gathered my papers, gave a respectful nod to the probate clerk, and stepped outside into the sharp, biting chill of the late afternoon. The air bit at my face, and my breath rose in visible clouds, but I didn't feel cold. The heavy oak door behind me closed with a soft, final click, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I was walking towards something better. Justice, I realized, wasn't always loud. It didn't always come with trumpets and fireworks and grand pronouncements. Sometimes it came in the quiet form of a meticulously folded document, a single, honest sentence on a video recording, a beloved old house reclaimed from the brink. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. The drive back from town was quiet, just the steady hum of the tires on the old gravel road and the occasional mournful whistle of wind slipping through the tiny cracks in the car window. Grandpa sat beside me in the front passenger seat, dozing lightly, his head resting against the window. He hadn't said much since we left the courthouse complex. He didn't need to. His frail fingers had found mine as we walked out those imposing double doors, and they hadn't let go for the entire walk to the car. By the time we finally reached the lake house, the sun had already begun its slow, graceful descent towards the horizon. The light, golden and mellow, turned everything it touched to burnished gold. The tall pine trees, the weathered wooden deck, the still surface of the water, even the old aluminum canoe leaning patiently beside the shed. It was the kind of magical, transformative light that made you remember things, important things, things you'd spent years trying to forget. I parked the car and carefully helped Grandpa into his wheelchair, adjusting the warm plaid blanket across his lap. His head tilted slightly, his gaze drawn towards the lake as we rolled out onto the familiar, creaking boards of the porch. His breath was shallow, but steady. It had taken weeks to get here. Months, really, if you counted all the legal wrangling and emotional turmoil, but we were finally, truly back. A small rustic table sat near the edge of the dock, overlooking the water. On it, a new cake, chocolate, rich and dark, just like the one from all those years ago, but not store-bought this time. I'd baked it myself that morning, while the old house still held the comforting scent of cedar and wood smoke and the faint, distant echoes of happier times. I lit a single candle. The small flame flickered bravely in the gentle lake breeze, but it held. "Happy 80th, Grandpa," I said softly. His lips curled into a slow, gentle smile. Is this all for me, Alex?" I nodded, my own throat tight with emotion. "Of course it is, Grandpa. Every bit of it." He looked at me then, a long, searching look, and then, like a switch being flipped, something clicked deep within his eyes. The fog that clouded them most days suddenly cleared, just for a moment, just enough. "Alex," he said, his voice surprisingly clear. "Alex." He remembered. My name. Tears threatened, blurring my vision, but I held them in, blinking them back. I reached for a fork, cut a soft, generous square from the freshly baked cake, and gently placed it on a small, chipped china plate. "No melting this time, Grandpa," I whispered, a small smile playing on my own lips. He chuckled, a faint, raspy sound, but a chuckle nonetheless. Good. I always hated it when the frosting dripped all over my good shirt. We sat there in the gathering twilight in comfortable silence, sharing the cake, and for the first time in so many long, weary years, it wasn't about birthdays missed or legacies contested or who got what in the bitter end. It was just us. Father and son, in spirit, if not by blood, sharing a quiet moment of peace by the water. Later that evening, after settling Grandpa inside for a nap by the warm fire, I stepped out onto the back porch alone, letting the cool night air wrap around me like a comforting blanket. The lake house glowed faintly behind me, its windows catching the last vestiges of the twilight like old wise eyes refusing to shut completely on the day. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through the latest news updates. The investigation into Brett's and Callista's affairs had gone public. Brett was officially being charged by the state. Elder exploitation, financial fraud, document tampering, a whole laundry list of serious misconduct. The IRS had concurrently opened a full audit into their tangled business dealings. And not surprisingly, 3 different families, former clients of Brett's, had already filed civil suits against him for various forms of business fraud and misrepresentation. One of his former, now very disgruntled clients had even posted a scathing warning on the local community online forum. The headline read, "Warning, hell smile politely while robbing you blind." I wish I could say I felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction, a sense of triumph, but the truth was I just felt done, tired, but done. Mom hadn't called, not even a text message. Last I heard through the local grapevine, she'd told a neighbor that I had orchestrated a vicious takedown out of pure bitterness and jealousy. She couldn't bring herself to look me in the eye at the courthouse during the brief preliminary hearing. She didn't show up for the final settlement conference. Maybe she never truly believed me, or maybe, just maybe, it hurt her more to admit that she knew, on some level, what was happening all along and had chosen to let it happen anyway, to look the other way. But I didn't need her version of closure anymore. My peace wasn't dependent on her approval. I walked into the spacious studio room, the room that had formerly been Grandpa's den. Now the walls bore a vibrant collection of watercolor landscapes, painted by the veterans I'd invited to stay here for a retreat last month. The wooden floors were scuffed and marked from the wheels of wheelchairs and walkers, but no one minded. There were soft, warm blankets draped over the comfortable armchairs, music from an old record player humming quietly in the background, and on a large corkboard near the window, a neatly pinned sign, "The Retreat at Willow Lake, for the ones who gave everything and were forgotten." We'd had 4 artists in residence stay so far. 2 former full-time caregivers, 1 retired hospice nurse who needed a space to heal from her own burnout, and an aging sculptor who hadn't touched clay in nearly a decade. This new venture, it wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about giving back what had been so cruelly taken from so many deserving people. Time, dignity, and a measure of stillness in a world that often felt too loud and demanding. As I sat down at the old oak desk to review a few intake forms for next month's scheduled guests, the mail slot in the front door creaked open, followed by the soft thud of an envelope landing on the hardwood floor of the entryway. I picked it up, curious, and flipped it over. No return address, just a neat, elegant script on the front, addressed simply to the man who changed everything. Inside was a letter. "Dear Alex," it began. "You don't know me, but I knew Brett last name. 10 years ago, he sold me a dream, a business partnership, that quickly turned into a nightmare of lawsuits and financial ruin. I lost nearly everything I had, except my daughter and my will to fight. When I saw your name and your grandfather's story on the local news last week, I recognized that same look in your eyes that I had worn for so many years, a profound exhaustion mingled with an unbreakable resolve. You didn't just protect your grandfather, Alex. You stood up to the kind of people who build their empires by relying on others staying silent, on others being too afraid or too broken to fight back. You didn't just save him. In a way, you saved people like me too, by showing that truth can prevail. Thank you." I reread the letter twice, a slow warmth spreading through my chest, before folding it carefully and tucking it into a worn, leather-bound journal where I'd started keeping anonymized stories and letters from some of our retreat guests. Not for public display, never that. Just for me, a quiet, private archive of resilience, of hope reclaimed. I walked out onto the dock one last time that night. The lake was still as polished glass under the soft glow of the moonlight. My reflection looked back at me from the dark water. Not younger, certainly not unscarred, but clearer, more defined. Somewhere behind me, in the warm, safe house, Grandpa stirred in his sleep, a soft, contented sigh, and deep inside me, something finally, truly settled. Not revenge, not even victory in the traditional sense, just peace. Sometimes the family we think we've lost simply makes space for us to find the strength we forgot we had or never knew existed within us. And sometimes true justice doesn't need to shout from the rooftops. Sometimes it just walks in quietly, lights a single candle against the darkness, and stays. If you've ever faced something like this, a betrayal that cut deep or had to fight to reclaim your truth, I'd genuinely love to hear your story in the comments below. I do read every one. And if these stories of quiet strength and hard-won justice resonate with you, please stick with us and subscribe for more. Sometimes, just sharing a little hope, a little understanding, is the best gift we can offer each other. And your super thanks support helps us continue to do just that. Thank you for listening.